Good evening. I hope you're all enjoying your meal. I hope that you'll continue to enjoy it, but we're going to go ahead and begin with this evening's presentation because I know that we all also have busy lives and don't want the evening to linger too long. Welcome to the Center for Global Development and this evening's presentation of the CGD Foreign Policy Commitment to Development Ideas in Action Award. I want to especially welcome tonight's awardee, Unilever CEO Paul Polman. I'm going to say that again. I want to especially welcome tonight's awardee, Unilever CEO Paul Polman and his wife Kim. Thank you for joining us, and I want everybody to please join me in thanking Mr. Polman for his leadership in making the world a better and fairer place. As many of you know, the Center for Global Development is unlike the majority of development organizations. They provide advice and support to developing countries on how they can do a better job. We, on the other hand, focus on the policies and practices of the rich and powerful. In our research and communications work, we try to hold up a mirror to the influential, and most of the time we're trying to draw attention to ways that they could do things differently and better. So it's a real pleasure once a year to have an opportunity to say job well done to somebody who has demonstrated a real commitment to development. We're pleased each year to present the Commitment to Development Award in cooperation with Foreign Policy. I'm sorry that Foreign Policy's CEO, David Rothkopf, can't be with us tonight due to an unexpected and unavoidable conflict, but I'm very pleased to welcome Ben Pauker, a Foreign Policy Executive Editor, to tell you a few things about the history of the award. Ben.
Hi. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to join you all this evening representing Foreign Policy in the presentation of the Commitment to Development Ideas in Action Award, and to extend my congratulations to Paul Polman, the winner of the 2013 award. This is the 11th year that the award has been presented. It began as a result of a conversation between Moises Naim, who was the former editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy, and the Center for Global Development's president, Nancy Birdsall. Back then, CGD was newly established, and FP was in the process of transforming from a stuffy academic quarterly to an award-winning glossy magazine. Of course, that was a long time ago now, back before the iPhone, back before everyone knew what a brick was. Globalization then was the word that was on the tip of everyone's tongue, the force that was going to reshape society, bringing developing nations up from what was then still called the Third World. So Moises suggested to Nancy that CGD and FP jointly sponsor an annual award that highlighted their shared belief that the actions of the rich and powerful, for better or worse, have a huge effect on the lives of poor people in the developing world. 11 years later, globalization isn't even a catchphrase. It's just something we take for granted. But as foreign policy has evolved, becoming a daily source of reporting and analysis around the world, so too is the halting but indelible upward rise of emerging nations. As a magazine, we realize that despite the headlines in Geneva, Beijing, or Washington, much of the real progress around the world isn't being made in conferences, or summits, or even think tanks. Sorry, Nancy. But it's in corporate boardrooms or online, even in supermarkets. And so, each year since 2003, CGD and FP have presented an award honoring an individual or organization that has made a significant contribution to changing the attitudes, policies, and practices of the rich world toward the developing world. Previous winners include Senator Richard Lugar, the One Campaign, Global Witness, Congressman Jim Colby, the UK's Gordon Brown, and Oxfam International's Make Trade Fair campaign. But I must admit a little bit of personal chagrin with this year's award. You see, for more than 15 years, from Brazil to Thailand, my father worked for Colgate-Palmolive. And I remember as a young boy, when we first arrived in Bangkok, him showing me the toothbrushes that people were using. It was a stick with a bit of horsehair literally tied to the end. And I recall him telling me, I remember this moment, that he said that in bringing just a bit of soap or dental hygiene to that small part of the world, and it was a really, really small thing, he felt like he was doing a bit of real, tangible good. And I also remember him telling me that in the ultra competitive world of consumer products companies, that Unilever was the bad guy. But I think we can safely say that we have one of the real good ones here tonight, and we at Foreign Policy are delighted to honor Mr. Paul Polman with this year's award. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to my boss, the founding president of the Center for Global Development, Nancy Birdsall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see all of you here. We are delighted to honor Paul Polman tonight, again, Chief Executive Officer of Unilever, for the tremendous leadership he's showing on the role that CEOs of large global corporations with the tremendous global reach that Unilever has, the role they can take in, referring back to what Lauren said, making the world a better place, a more just and prosperous place for everyone, and in CGD's view, especially for the least fortunate who live in developing countries. I want to just say a word about, in introducing Paul, about his work in the area of tropical deforestation, and then more broadly, his activities that reach the development front in many other ways. On forests, Paul has been really, I can tell from talking to him tonight and from some earlier conversations, he is surely the most outspoken and effective advocate for reducing the deforestation that is associated with the production of consumer goods. He has used Unilever's global reach and leverage as the third largest consumer goods company in the world. There seems to be some controversy about whether it's first or the third, but it's apparently the third here. Maybe you'll tell us, Paul, more about that. In any event, it is a corporation with reach and leverage, and he's used that position he has to publicly confront the problem of deforestation that's associated with forest-based materials, particularly with palm oil and pulp and paper. And we're going to hear in a few minutes more about the example of palm oil from my colleague, palm oil in Indonesia from my colleague, Francis Seymour. And I hope that we'll hear a little bit from Paul himself when he's speaking about his activities through the Consumer Goods Forum, the Tropical Alliance for Deforestation, and so on. I feel actually particularly fortunate to have had the chance to talk with Paul a little bit in the recent period, because we're working on a deforestation project here at the center. And the conversations with him are giving me insight to how important it is to have people like him concerned with this issue, the kind of change that he can bring about, both because he knows what's going on and because he's willing to put his time and leadership into the issue. Beyond forests, on the broader front, Paul served on the United Nations high-level panel on the post-2015 Global Development Agenda. Those of you who are not in the subculture of tropical deforestation know what that means. He helped to organize a business outreach program that includes companies in more than 30 countries, and those companies together account for nearly 10% of global GDP. So he's working with the big guys. I have a colleague, Charles Kenny, who was, as is the case for some of you here, an insider on the discussions in the high-level panel on the Global Development Agenda. And he reported to me that Paul Polman was without question the most active and effective member of that panel from the business community. All right, that's short. Paul is also an active member of the B Team, apparently a club of global business leaders focused, it sounds like, on the double bottom line, a member of Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, which my colleague Amanda Glassman here has explained to me, is a consortium of governments, organizations, and individuals working towards ending hunger and malnutrition. I honestly don't know how he has the time to do all these things, but when you talk to him, you get a feel for it because you see how effective he is in making the key connections in an efficient way. Paul is a great example of what a corporate CEO can do. Paul, we're delighted to have this opportunity. It's an honor to honor you tonight. The world would be a better place if we had more CEOs who follow your practice, working on what I would think of as a shared mission with everyone here for a better world, particularly for the least fortunate out there, a more just and prosperous global system and global market. Thank you very much. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nancy. Francis Seymour, a senior fellow here at CGD, is one of the world's leading experts on tropical forest policy and the former Director General of the Center for International Forestry Research, or CIFOR, which is headquartered in Indonesia. When we were considering Mr. Polman as a nominee for this award, Francis was among the many people who stepped forward as an advocate for selecting him. She's on the other side of the world tonight and can't be with us, but before her departure, she recorded this brief video message explaining her reasons for advocating that we give the Commitment to Development Award to Mr. Polman.
Good evening. I'm Francis Seymour, a senior fellow here at the Center for Global Development. Stopping tropical deforestation is critical to global development as well as to protecting the climate. And the bad news is the window for action is rapidly closing. But the good news is that Paul Polman has shown what those of us in rich countries can do to help solve this problem. We can work with the companies and the governments of forest countries to decouple deforestation from the production of globally traded goods such as palm oil and pulp and paper. Mr. Polman has set an example through the commitments of Unilever to responsible sourcing of those commodities. He has also exercised leadership across the industry through the Consumer Goods Forum. And he's promoted partnership with governments through the Tropical Forest Alliance. And in what could be a game changer, he and others recently successfully encouraged the world's largest trader in palm oil, Wilmar International, to adopt a new policy getting deforestation out of its supply chain globally, effective immediately. The Wilmar commitment sets a new global standard for industry and creates new constituencies in forest countries among the private sector for improved land use policies and improved law enforcement. Mr. Polman's actions give us hope that market transformation can be achieved and that we can stop tropical deforestation. I only regret that I can't be with you tonight to congratulate Mr. Polman in person for these remarkable achievements. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Nancy, Mr. Polman, Ben, would you please come to the stage? Nancy, over to you for the presentation of the award.
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much. I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for being here tonight, because you had a choice to be at the White House with Mr. Hollande or to be here with me. And I think you made the right choice, you know. You might have come out even paying more tax if you would go to him. I'm sure they'll get along tonight. Anyway, I was at my wife and I just flew in. We were in Arkansas and seeing Walmart and making use of this trip and being in the US. And we were at the airport, and my wife said, we were sitting next to some people and they were talking, and I was listening to them. Obviously, my wife said, you shouldn't listen to people talking. It's always some friction if you travel with your wife. And I was zooming in, and I quickly discovered that I was a doctor, an engineer, and an economist. And this doctor said, we have the oldest professions. So I thought, became a little bit curious. So he said, if you go back to the book of Genesis, and Eve came out of the ribs of Adam, was the first successful operation. Both patients survived, so doctors must be the oldest profession. The engineer said, that's not true at all. We have the oldest profession. When there was chaos, we created the universe. You need an engineer to do that. Out of chaos comes order. Engineer. Engineer is the oldest profession. The economist said, not at all. We have the oldest profession. Because who do you think created chaos in the first place? Anyway, on behalf of our 175,000 wonderful employees that we have, I certainly will accept this award, but it's really for them that we do this, because when we talk a lot of the things that are happening, these are efforts of a lot of people, and I'm happy to see so many people here as well in the audience who work so hard for a better world for all. I think we've all realized that we have children and they will have children, and we want to give them the same opportunities. And being very fortunate, having been born on this side of the world, in my case, the Netherlands, doesn't give us the right to deny the same opportunities to other people. And I think it goes back to basic human rights more than anything that we're talking. I'm very honored to listen to Ben, and thanks for your kind words, and the same for Nancy. And obviously, listening also to Francis talking, is very honored to be here and looking at some of the previous award winners, Senator Lucar that you mentioned, or you mentioned Global Witness, a very important organization, or Publish What You Pay, or Gordon Brown and others. It's certainly a great honor to be here. But also what you do for In the Center itself, or the Foreign Policy magazine, your job of further developing or helping develop the understanding of what is needed in these global development challenges that Lawrence talked about is an important, absolutely important job. The mission you've set is the right mission. You are definitely an organization that is asking the right questions, analyze the right trends, and force people to think a little bit out of the box. Critically, probably provide some pathways or platforms for us and for governments, which is badly needed now, to figure out how to make this a more inclusive world. And I'll talk about it in a second, why that is important. But I also think that what you do is also for us a great inspiration, because we need that as well. Don't underestimate, although you have as your mission to help governments do this, it's the same for companies. More and more companies are becoming global, and they have to take that same approach and integrate that into their business models holistically. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So I'm particularly pleased that you call this award actually Ideas to Action. First and foremost, I am a businessman. I cannot deny that. And obviously, one of the things that we like to do, which was the same in the high-level panel, we like to get to action. So what do we do really? And who's doing what? And how do we measure and track? Otherwise, you don't move things forward. I think that's one of the things that businesses are good about. And that's why in the report, we talk so much about time-bound goals, and we talk about measurements and how do we interrogate failings when they happen and ensure that people are held accountable. We talk about this new form of partnership in the world that is actually based on this mutual understanding, the common good, but also mutual accountability and transparency. Otherwise, you cannot just live in a world where you just make these commitments. And you as a body are clearly understanding that. Now, actions are urgently needed in this world. I personally think this world is, and I hate to stand here, to be honest, because I think this world is already very long on words, but short on actions. And I'm actually happy to see many of the things that I participate in, like the forum as well. We were at Davos a few weeks ago, that increasingly people are rallying together to create things for action in the marketplace and not just give lofty speeches about whatever topic. So that's why I want to keep my topics short as well. But let me just remind everybody why actions are urgently needed. This is, despite what people say or believe in the economic process, this is still a world where 1.2 billion people live well below the poverty line, in extreme poverty. This is still a world today where 2.5 billion people don't have access to clean water or hygiene. This is still a world today where over 200 million people are unemployed, and increasingly so the young people. This is still a world today where 1 billion people go to bed hungry, not knowing if they wake up the next morning. And this in a system where we then also have the courage to waste about 30-40% of food, let alone the climate change effects of that. And then on the other side, we're creating one of the biggest epidemics that the world has ever seen, which is diabetes too. And when I was leading the food security task force for the G20, we figured it only takes about $80 billion a year to solve the food crisis, to have these people not go to bed hungry. Only 80 billion, which is far less than the fines we impose on banks nowadays, which they pay out of their quarterly profits. Which is, and if you, I was talking about the food waste, if you compare that with the food waste, the 30-40% of the food we waste is about $750 billion. So it takes 1/10 of that to solve this issue. And we call ourselves the most intelligent species. I'll leave that up to you to answer. But what you are and what we do in this room, we are doers. And I think that's the most important thing, that we walk the talk. And I always refer to Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits, that he wrote, where he said, you can't talk your way out of things, or you can talk your way out of things you've behaved yourself into. You have to behave yourself out of things. We've behaved ourselves into an economic system that we now have to behave ourselves out of. And that's true for all of us, otherwise the system isn't going to work. So you've earned the reputation not just being a think tank, but what I like is a think and do tank, and I think these things go hand in hand. Why do we need to take these actions, and what do I briefly want to cover? The first one is the crisis of 2008 was actually a very good crisis. I've said that many times. I think above all was a crisis of ethics. Not many people actually went to jail. But it has made us think about a lot of things we were doing and actually questioning things. When a stock market goes up every year 10-15%, nobody asks themselves questions. But when some things happen and it doesn't all of a sudden automatically go up, we start to think about what we were doing. And it's very clear that we come to a conclusion that it is desperately needed that we build a new economic world order where we operate within the planetary boundaries that we have, and also that we take the human values more at the core of what we do. And I'll talk about it in a minute. But it's also clear that the challenge to do that is so big that we need the multi-stakeholder partnerships to do that. It absolutely doesn't serve anything to say this is the government's responsibility, or business did this, or NGOs should be doing that. These issues are so big that we need to work together with the right people to drive these things to scale. And then obviously we need these governance mechanisms around it that I talked before to hold us all to the account. So let's just take each of these in a second and see what we can do to move this world to a better world. With capitalism always has evolved, by the way. When you had in this country Franklin Roosevelt, he created the New Deal, and he figured it needed to have something else at the time of the Great Depression than what was there before. And you created something that was better. When my parents grew up in the Second World War and we were born just after that, they wanted to create something at that side of the ocean that worked for them. So we've always evolved capitalism. So it's not that it's good or bad. In fact, capitalism has been an enormous positive force in this world. Ben was talking about globalization. It has lifted 500 million people out of poverty just in the last 3 decades. Now, a lot of people say it's China, but at the end of the day, it has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. It's given education to many more people that were otherwise deprived. One of the Millennium Goals that has been achieved is access to education. In fact, halving the poverty was one of the overarching Millennium Goals that has been achieved. It brought medicine and other things to many people. I would have said, I probably wouldn't have been standing here myself were it not for globalization. So I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, we've also found that it had its limitations. I think the crisis of 2008, 2009 made us understand that it came at an enormous cost. Enormous levels of government debt or private debt, enormous levels of over-consumerism, and frankly, leaving too many people behind, as I was just explaining before, with a little bit of disregard for what you might call the natural capital. And any system that is not in equilibrium is a little bit like a cancer in your body. Any system that is not in equilibrium will ultimately be rejected. People are saying, why do you see these Occupy Wall Street movements or Arab Springs or people going into the streets of Turkey or Brazil or many other places now? Is this high discontent when too many people feel that they are not participating or are excluded. They're not going to accept that anymore. And we're living in a very strange world right now where power is increasingly more concentrated in fewer people. You've undoubtedly seen this Oxfam study that came out a few weeks ago at the time of Davos, that 85 of the richest people in the world have the same net wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion. So someone was describing that as you could see a double-decker running around in London where I live, and you can load about 85 people in a double-decker that has the same wealth as 3.5 billion people. And a lot of people feel that that's a system that's not right anymore. The top 1.2 billion people, obviously in this country, lots of them as well, the top 1.2 billion people consume 75% of the world's resources. The bottom 1 billion people, only 1%. That's not a system that's in equilibrium. So any system that's not in equilibrium will be rejected. And this is before 2 billion more people come in. Before you see, the middle class growing to about 5 billion people. Obviously, enormous opportunities for all of us, opportunities for companies as well, but we have to figure out how to make it work. If it's not inclusive, it will not work for companies either. So I can stand here and say it's an enlightened self-interest from a business perspective. If countries don't function, we don't function. If you cannot get everybody to participate, you don't grow either. A company like Unilever, it's a wonderful company. I don't know if we're the number one consumer company. I'd like to be the number one company that's not a consumer company, actually. That would be my goal. But you look at the US, you see, since the recession in the US, the economy has grown in the US, but the middle class in the US has not benefited at all. In fact, they're at the same level as in 1986, because the wealth has been really only been created by people that hold the capital and not the labor. And there's a real risk that this is a growth with technology coming along as well, which is a jobless growth, where more and more people will actually be excluded. The resulting social cohesion problems that come with it, which you're starting to see already in Southern Europe, are very serious. If people are out of work 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, they become unemployable. And you see now in Europe, it's already 5-6 years ago since we had the crisis, 56% youth unemployment in Spain or Greece, etc. That is an enormous challenge. That is not to the benefit of business, but more importantly, it's not to the benefit of society. And if you buy into the principle that business should serve society, you should be really worried about that, all of us. And I know you are, and that's why you're here. So our system needs to evolve. Now, I live in Europe, and not much growth in Europe anymore. The markets are down, population is down. Europeans have long ago decided not to make love anymore. It's the only part of the world where the birth rate goes down. And so it's a real challenge, and nothing grows anymore. But we were flying back from India the other day, and I said to my wife, I'm going to write a book, because she said, don't do this, because there is a golden rule that any CEO who writes a book usually is out of office the year later, because they're sort of ego trippers. Please, remember me for all I've done. And but if you look at Europe, the only business that is growing is, in fact, books about capitalism, inclusive capitalism, responsible capitalism, capitalism in crisis, So clean capitalism, community capitalism. Go to constructive capitalism. Go to Amazon and you'll see that. So I said, I'm going to write a book about capitalism. And I'm going to call it 50 Shades of Capitalism. So if you have any suggestions for any of these chapters, I'd be happy to do this. But seriously, lots of people are thinking about these new forms of capitalism and what it needs to be. Richard Buckminster Fuller, who was a American architect and systems theorist, said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That's what we're really talking about here. How can we make enough of a change to make the existing model that we had obsolete? And I'm encouraged actually by a lot of things I see, because changes need to obviously happen at different levels. Now, changes are happening at the market level. We were having a brief discussion at our table about quarterly reporting or not, and there are changes happening in that field. Green bonds, we were talking with Kalper and green investment funds, the ESG funds, the principles of responsible investment. I see things moving in the right direction there from a market perspective. But you also need to have these changes, and it will be hard work, I don't be misunderstood there. But you also need changes at company and individual levels. So at a company level, in Unilever, when I became CEO in 2009, we decided to put a different business model out there. We always had been a good company. And yes, we have fierce competition, Ben, but I don't think we look at it as enemies, you know. Some of our competitors wake up every morning and look themselves in the mirror probably when they shave, because many companies are male companies. We fortunately have 50% women, although I'm not the representative myself, blame my mother, but we don't think about how we can kill competition. We really think about how we can make this a better world and serve consumers, because if we do that, or serve citizens, because the more we do that, the better we will be off. I'm 100% convinced of that. And I think more and more responsible companies, including Colgate, are doing that. So we decided, let's make a plan which we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. It's very clear with the 2 billion people still coming, with the world growing, that we can double our business. In fact, our business was coming down. So when I came in as the outside CEO, I had to give more of a rallying cry that we needed to grow our business again. So I said, why don't we double it? But I said something else. I said, we'll double it in a way that we totally decouple this from environmental impact and improve the social impact. And we take that responsibility across all of our countries, all of our brands, but not only where CSR or shared value is, which is usually in your own factories and your own products under your own control. Now we said we go for the total value chain, from sustainable sourcing, from the farm, if you want to sustainable living. You might call it the fork. Now, why is that so important? Because the impact is infinitely much higher. Using the scale and size of companies like ours. You take Unilever, we have 2 billion consumers using us every day. We are in 7 out of 10 households globally. Not that that's something to be proud of, but you have to think about what you do with this. And then if you have that scale and reach, there's an enormous possibility to transform markets. So you look at climate change. We talk deforestation, we talk climate change. So I'll use the example there. We have about 4 million tons of CO2 in our factories with our trucks transporting the goods. And that's 4 million tons. In the whole value chain, we have 450 million tons. Depends how long people shower, warm up the water, the cooking, the washing their hands. So the climate change on that side, or the agriculture side, the deforestation side, which is food production is a big demand for deforestation, actually. So if you get 10% out of your total value chain, you save 10 times more than we use ourselves with CO2 emission. And that is true for many of the other things that we need to solve. So that's why we took that thing. And we got to some audacious targets that are actually 50 targets, but they're kind of strange targets for people, because we talk about creating 500,000 more jobs for smallholder farmers. We talk about employing 5 million women more in our value chain. We talk about reaching 1 billion people with hand washing and sanitation. We set targets of sourcing all of our agricultural raw materials sustainably, and we report on it. We audit that, but the targets are so audacious that we also say we cannot do it alone. And when I launched it, I also made very clear that we don't have all the answers. Because if we would have had all the answers, and if we could have done it alone, we probably would have done it already. But we need to do this together, and this is where the notion of partnership comes in. Now, the reason we do this model is built on a very simple premise. And let me just explain it in 2 words. The Arab Spring in Egypt was 17 days that Mubarak was kicked out of office. There have always been high unemployment in Egypt. There have always been a lot of inflation in Egypt. There have always been rising and fluctuating food prices. There's always been a high level of corruption in Egypt. Why only 17 days? It was 17 days because we organize on Facebook, we talk to each other on Twitter, and we show the world what we do on YouTube. If it takes 17 days in Egypt to take a regime out of order, then it will only take nanoseconds to vote a company out of order in the future. And it's actually happening as we talk. That's the amazing thing to me. We did a study once. There are only 60,000 companies on the stock exchange globally. You might have thought there were more, but a lot of private companies are non-listed. Only 60,000. The top 1,000 of those make up half of the market cap. Now, they've seen their market cap go up and down far more since the crisis in 2008 than at any time before. If you now produce your products from a factory in Bangladesh, where 1,150 people lose their lives, which were forced in there nearly at gunpoint. And by the way, a small detail, these people got paid 11 cents an hour. 11 cents an hour. The lowest next country in the world is Vietnam at 26 cents an hour. That's as close as you can get to modern day slavery. You think that people think it's cool that we all bought a $1 t-shirt when this is the price? And because of the digitization of society, it's now visible. As much as is it visible if we put horse meat in there instead of beef. As much as it's visible if we manipulate LIBOR rates or foreign currency rates. The world is fed up with that. As the world is also fed up with the fact that 85 people have the same wealth as 3.5 billion people. And if they can vote Egypt out of office in 17 days, they can vote a company out of office in nanoseconds. And that's why I don't understand why not more CEOs get this, because the average lifetime now of a company in the US that's publicly traded is only 18 years. That's the price you pay for short-termism. How can you solve these problems like deforestation or other things if we run these businesses built to sell instead of built to last, if we build them for the short term? So we have to get out of this short-termism and create a capitalistic system, whatever you want to call it, that is more inclusive and more to the long term. Now, within that, it is not enough anymore to say we are less bad or we stay at the right side of the law. It's not enough anymore to say we will minimize our footprint. The issues that need to be solved of poverty, of food security, of social inclusion, of employment are so big that any company that wants to survive in the future needs to show that they make a positive contribution towards solving it. In fact, we're already 1 minute before 12. Benjamin Franklin in this country, he started the post office with you. I always thought when I grew up in the Netherlands, he was an American president, but you see, you can be famous if you start a post office. But Benjamin Franklin said, you may delay, but time will not, and lost time will never be found again. We are at that point right now. The 2-degree challenge is already virtually impossible. So if you don't make in your business anymore, if you don't understand that you have to make a positive contribution, which goes well beyond the shared value, when I talk to Michael Porter and others, you will be rejected. And that's the essence of what we're trying to do. And you can only do that by putting fully your business model, whatever business you're in, to the service of society. And if you don't do that, you go the same direction as Egypt once more. So for us, it's about creating stakeholder value, not shareholder value. That is a very important thing. Shareholder value is a result, and yet many companies see this as their prime objective. It is also, be sure that if you are a global company, which is where the Center for Global Development comes in, that you're very mindful of creating local value. We don't operate with our companies in any countries just for tax haven points of view if we don't have businesses there. We pay tax where we have our economic activity. You take Africa, 52 billion a year goes there in overseas development aid, 52 billion, which is way too much, by the way, because it's not as effective as people think. But the sad part is over 75 billion leaves Africa. So the system we are creating, where many companies operate there and not participate in the system or not help these companies set up systems for collection of tax or other things, is not going to be a sustainable system either. You have to be really participating in making it better, in creating these institutions, rule of law, governance, access to legal systems, and all these things that come with it. But it's our responsibility, because when that happens, your businesses will be more successful as well. So this geographic context is very important. And then obviously, as I mentioned, you need to do that across the value chain with many partners if you want to do that. I talked about some of our objectives. The main thing that we're trying to do is give every brand that we sell, because ultimately we're a branded goods producer, give every brand that we sell a social purpose. Now, if that purpose is big enough, the brand will be very successful. So, for example, our Knorr brand, which is a savory brand, help fight food security. Do that with smallhold farmers, do that with women. Because you work with smallhold farmers and women, you also get into issues of land rights or whatever. Because 75% of deforestation, or illegal deforestation as I call it, is driven by the demand for food. You have to have a point of view on deforestation, which brings me obviously here. The same thing with the social compliance. You know what, the whole debate of fair wages or living wages, we have to start participating in that. And if you don't, I don't think that debate will be very well managed either, and so forth and so forth. So you have to keep that responsibility. All of our brands should have a social purpose. We have a Pureit brand that gives water. We have our oral care brands that give oral hygiene. We have our Dove brand here in the US, which does women's self-esteem. Only 4% of women think they're beautiful in the bodies they're in, which is all given to them because of all these computer-doctored posters that you see or images on the screen. And, when we ran Sketches, one of the YouTube campaigns. Has anybody seen Sketches on YouTube? We got 175 million people across the world just in a few days looking at that. We gave an action in the US where women could change banners. Instead of saying, have you done your liposuction, or when do you do your facelift, or have you, changed any other parts of your body, it let you change these banners. I love you, Mom. You made a wonderful meal. You're a great mother. You raised 2 wonderful children. We had over 100 million impressions in 1 week's time that people changed, just to get the positive thing out of all of these brands. Domestos is one of the leading brands on toilet cleaning. That brand has as a goal to build 400,000 toilets to help contribute to the issue of open defecation. Lifebuoy, one of our earliest and oldest soap brands that was nearly dying 5 years ago, is now one of our fastest growing brands because it stands for sanitation. There are 4 million children in the world that still don't make it past the age of 5 because of issues of diarrhea and pneumonia. Well, all our children made it past the age of 5. All our children do. Why don't we give that right to everybody else? The simple act of hand washing saves 2 million lives a year. So that's good for what you do to solve a problem, but it's also good for your business. Obviously, it drives the soap business. I'm not surprised it's growing double digit. And I'm not ashamed of that either. When I meet Mohammed Yunus, I always tell him we're the biggest NGO. We're much bigger than you are. And he always gets a little nervous on that. And I said, yeah, because I'm non-government. I'm like you, I'm non-government. So I'm a non-government organization. I know that for sure, that I can tell you. And the only thing that is different is we figured out how to make a little bit of money so that we can do it sustainably. Yunus has to keep going around with his hat to get money. So we have to figure out how to make the wealth, make it sustainable. And I don't want to talk down anything this wonderful man is doing. But you have to, why not make business models that actually contribute positively to society in a sustainable way? We just did that, for example, with the Simrise last week. We announced with the German Development Agency, Simrise, one of our suppliers. We look at Madagascar. Madagascar is a big issue on vanilla. We are big vanilla users with our ice cream. We have Ben & Jerry's, Breyers, and some of the other brands like Magnum. So we want this to be really sustainable. We want crop diversification, but we also want right livelihood. So we created this livelihood monitor, and we're converting that industry. It's easier to do for us. We worked on food security with smallhold farmers. All the initiatives that we're all driving, like Grow Africa, the new vision for Africa, which is now in 17 countries. We got companies together with about 4.5 billion, and companies, that's where nutrition comes in obviously as well, pledging 19 billion to lift Africa up, and now other parts of the world focused on smallhold farmers. And then we obviously come to the issue of tropical deforestation. As I mentioned, deforestation is basically driven by the demand for food. And it's more than what's being said. It's obviously soy, it's paper, it's pulp, it's beef, it's palm oil. We are one of the bigger palm oil producers. And not only that, obviously, it's an enormous destructive force on climate change. When we are working with Christiana Figueres on the climate change agreements this year in Peru and next year in Paris, and we have to conclude this, is to take these big blocks that we have to solve. We can always talk about this broad climate change and make people worried, but you have to talk practically. How do you get rid of the combustion engine in cars and make it electric? How do we get green cities? How do we stop deforestation? You add up all these big blocks that people can relate to, and you solve the world's problem. Climate change is only 17% of global warming. Happens to be quite big, in my opinion, but 17% of global warming. So, deforestation. So if we can get rid of the illegal deforestation. And the best thing we did, which we should have done on climate change, is when I talk about it, you've heard me talk about it now for a while now, I always say illegal deforestation. I don't say net deforestation. I'm not so smart, I don't know all the details. I just know it's illegal deforestation. And the reason it's illegal is that everything we do now cannot be reversed. And by calling it illegal, by the way, I get far more people to agree with me, because there's something still in our humanity and our values that we don't like to do things illegally. We should have called the whole thing illegal climate change, and we would have solved it already, I'm convinced. So for us, in fact, if we don't do anything with the demand for food, in the next 30, 40 years, we have to produce as much food as the last 8,000 years. People don't understand that. But changing dietary habits, population, wealth increase, population increase. The next 30, 50 years, the same as the last 8,000 years. It doesn't add up if we don't change things. In fact, if you would let it go like now, we need 10 million square kilometers of land. The sad part is that in the last 10 minutes I've been talking, another 400 acres have been, hectares have been disappearing. It's bigger than Central Park in New York. So that's really where the action comes in. We co-founded the Roundtable of Sustainable Palm Oil. That was a good initiative in the beginning. There's about 1,000 members, 50 countries. They had these 8 principles. Obviously, now people want to set the bar higher, but it created something. And there was a lot of pressure when I came on, why don't we blow it up? And it's not working and we don't get to the results. But I'm glad we stuck to it, because just running away from these things is never the answer, to be honest. And often when things don't work, we like to run away from it. And we've used that as a base that has given us about 15% of certified palm oil in the world. We as a company are 100% certified already, and we're actually building our own fractionation units because we want to be source certified. I think that's going to be even more important. But it has helped us to get to the critical mass. And I have to thank also many of you in the audience, but one guy who understood that very well was Jason Clay from WWF. And he started something that caught my attention right away, which was this market transformation project. And Jason said very simply, we focus on about 20 or 25 of the world's biggest ingredients, materials, like tea or palm oil and all that. And we look at the 100 companies, and they control about 25%. In our case, it would be tea or palm oil. So, and then you have Cargill or ADM and others that come with it. And if we just make these companies transform, we get to a tipping point, and then you move markets. And that really, I like that reasoning. You don't need that many people. When you get 193 countries in the room to do the Rio +20 declaration, you get a lowest common denominator that basically is an empty document. And you see the same things with how we're trying to do that. But when you get with the climate change negotiations or the Doha rounds or other things, but when we get the right people in the room, that doesn't need that to be that many, just the 30 people or so, you can get to a tipping point. So this is where Wilmar comes in, because Wilmar and Mr. Kuo was to me was very courageous, because he finally said, with a lot of the work that you all have been doing, and some of the external stimulus that was undoubtedly given to him, that we need to move forward. And he came up with a declaration fairly recently that was referred to, that was very, I think, very progressive on no deforestation, no peat, and then obviously also no exploitation policy, the social side of it. Again, Wilmar itself is about 45% on palm oil. They're basically traders, but they buy about 45% of the palm oil. So if we can get Sindarbi or Sinarmas or Cargill or one or two others to join, you're at 70%, that's a tipping point. I'm sure that we can then move it forward. And that's the most exciting thing for all of us. And again, if we don't do it, our business is at stake itself. We then used the Global Consumer Goods Forum, which is a body of the biggest retailers and manufacturers. In fact, that's why I was at Walmart, because Doug McMillan has just taken over from Mike Duke, and I want to be sure that there's continuity. Because if Walmart goes to the toilet, everybody notices. So we need them on board, for all the things we're doing. And Walmart has been very willing to make commitments, but they have not been always leading it proactively themselves, being afraid of their scale and size, perhaps, and always stayed a little bit in the background. But if we can have them step up. And the Global Consumer Goods Forum is, in fact, the biggest retailers and manufacturers together. So we made this commitment to help Christiana Figueres at that time in Mexico, in Cancun, where she desperately wanted to announce something. And we said, why don't we announce, using that deadline, that by 2020, the industry will not sell anything anymore that comes from illegal deforestation. And at the same time, we announced that we would move the industry to natural refrigerants on all of our ice cream cabinets and the Coke cabinets and all that, which, by the way, is 4 to 7% of global warming. And we're working on that quite actively, thanks to, in this case, Greenpeace, who started to put the pressure on us. Then in Rio, we created the Tropical Forest Alliance with tremendous help from the US, Russia from USAID, and many others here once more. We created the Tropical Forest Alliance to get the governments involved. I think because of the global governance right now, it's very difficult to expect governments to initiate things. But if you create enough critical mass, governments are smart enough to want to be part of it. So we got, not surprisingly, the government from the US, the UK, Norway, Indonesia, the Netherlands, my country, and then also Mrs. Sirleaf from Liberia. They've all signed up to this Tropical Forest Alliance. We had here not long ago with the Transatlantic Council, we had a dinner, and Santos was here from Colombia, so he agrees on that now. So we're working on getting Colombia in. I saw Dilma 2 weeks ago in Davos, so we're getting Brazil in now, hopefully. But it builds it. And then the COP19 that we had in Warsaw, again, some good commitments came out of that with the RED Plus, with the $280 million that was committed. So I see momentum building there. And with the World Economic Forum, some of you were there, I chaired a session on deforestation. I think we had about 80 people there, and from all the different walks of life, and some of you were here. And again, real commitments to move this forward. And I'm even more excited now that we found a good purpose for the financial community. You know, we've made enough jokes about them, but frankly, we need them. And they also need to have a purpose again to serve society, not serve themselves. So the Banking Environment Initiative is a great initiative where we said to the biggest banks, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Barclays, Anthony Jenkins is actually chairing it, the CEO of Barclays. We created the Banking Environment Initiative where we now leverage the financial industry to be sure that the financing goes to the right people, and that people that are responsibly producing get the financing, and the people that are not fitting that definition are being excluded from that. That's a tremendous opportunity for banks to do the right thing. But so we create these ecosystems. Despite all this good news, we have a lot to do still. I'm very concerned about Africa, because Africa is the next continent to conquer for many companies, and we don't want to repeat the lessons we've learned the hard way in Indonesia or Malaysia. So we have to set up things to protect their forests. And that's why I'm so very pleased that Mrs. Sirleaf immediately rallied to be part of this. She's already the champion for the WASH programs in Africa for us, water, sanitation, and health, but she also is going to help us on the deforestation part of that. We also need to be sure that we include the smallhold farmers. There's some very big producers out there, but if we do this smartly, we should also do this in a way that ensures livelihoods and protects smallhold farmers, as well as the people who have the forest-based incomes. This is a whole, a forest alive. Unfortunately, that's why we do integrated accounting, but a dead tree in this world is worth more than a tree alive. Is a sad thing. So we need to be sure that we create these livelihoods for these people as well. And then I think we also need to work with governments a little bit more to look at these commodity flows. We've been trying to see if we can get differential tariffs, if the governments can have procurement strategies that put their word where their mouth is. But there's an enormous amount of money out there being spent. So these are the multiple stakeholder approaches that you need to do that I think are giving us the breakthroughs we're looking for. And if there is one skill that I always say when I go to business schools, etc., amongst other skills that the future CEOs need to have is, besides have an engagement with society, they also need to be a little bit more system thinkers. You need to be able to see through this whole complexity of water, energy, food, and all that, and distill it into some direct actions related to your businesses to move it forward. And this is a good example of that. Greater transparency, though, in all of this is also absolutely key. That goes by itself. We have to create greater transparency. If there is no transparency, there will never be trust. Trust is low right now. It's way too low in business and governments. So if you don't create transparency, you don't create the trust. And if you don't have the trust, you don't have the basis for prosperity. It's as simple as that. So I'm a big fan to make as much transparent and publish. And that's also where you come in with the CDG, because your commitment to development index, for example, that we briefly talked, and that's on your website, is a clear indication of how you do this. And In this case, where you show the developed countries what they should be doing towards the developing countries, you've identified the illicit financial flows to end this banking secrecy that is important as well, that we get transparency there. So we are pursuing quite actively the integrated reporting, obviously, and then you need to have the social P&L and the environmental P&L. It's not easy to do, but we are publishing again this year an integrated financial report. We're trying to get a group of companies together, UPS in this country, BMW, Unilever, working with the World Business Council to create critical mass, to have people report more and be held accountable for that. Again, to build this trust. Andrew is here, the Global Forest Watch tool, in fact, that you've worked on also, and in fact originated with CGD, WRI, and Google, is exactly meant to be that as well, to create that transparency again, that gives that trust. So the internet has given us a lot of possibilities to democratize knowledge, to give people access to that, and also to hold us accountable. And that's probably the biggest positive force that is happening if we use it as such to create a more inclusive world. We also see, and I'll wrap up here, some other coalitions forming in many different areas that make me feel good that we're on the right track. With the World Business Council I mentioned, we have Action 2020. I'm part of the new climate economy with Felipe Calderon, the former president of Mexico, where we are really trying to show that economic growth and fighting climate change doesn't have to be decoupled. They can be reinforcing. In fact, we are firmly convinced that if we don't tackle climate change, we don't have long-term economic growth. At the forum, we have the engagement of tomorrow's consumer. You have many of the websites, Purpose, Avas, or Plus Social Good, that actually are harnessing movements now. The young are obviously an incredibly important part of this. I'm very much concentrating myself on the young with networks like One Young World, Global Shapers, Ashokas, and all that. Because the young people in the emerging markets, they are already 50% of the population today. And they understand better than anybody else that they are 100% of the population tomorrow. When we did the Millennium Development Goals and we created the website, The World We Want, we had over 1 million of those people participating, mainly the young. They're also digitally savvy, so they connect very fast. But they know what they want, I can tell you. It's their world. And what surprised me most was a lot of them were from Africa. Which brings me to the most important thing that is happening in the next 2 years, which are very closely related. The one I referred to already, which is the climate change agreements that Christiana is leading. We have the climate summit coming up in September. Then at the end of the year in November, it's Peru. And that basically has to conclude the agreements that need to be signed in Paris in 2015. At the same time, we're working on the post-2015 Millennium Development Goals, where many people now say they have to be sustainable development goals. You cannot develop if you don't do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. And if we can get these two processes closer linked and aligned, and if we keep pressure on the political system, because it's an intergovernmental process that is negotiating, and come out with a very courageous but progressive Millennium Development Goals, I think that we are part of history if we can do that, because I've become convinced that in the next 15 years, we as a generation have the first and only opportunity that our predecessors never had. Perhaps the ones after us never get a chance to, if we keep going the way we're doing. We have the opportunity to be the group of people that irreversibly eradicates poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. That to me is already enough to give the meaning or energy to move some of these things forward. Who doesn't want to be part of this? The alternative is not going to be good. The alternative will be probably 1 or 2 more generations after us that simply ask the question, why didn't they act? Why didn't they do something? Because it will be very difficult to reverse if we don't do it now. So don't you want to be part of that generation and that irreversibly eradicates poverty? Fight for that as much as you can, also with the UN and the countries that you can influence or represent to make these courageous goals as they negotiate, because there is a big push to keep everybody else out. And obviously that is very sad, because at the end they represent all of us, which is the citizens of this planet. So there you have it. Lots of positives, lots of movements, thanks to all what you're doing. But the job is only half done. If we can use the next year or two especially, and then we can say, whatever it is time for us to move on to a better world, we can say with pride, we did it. We did it. We gave everybody a chance, and we eradicated poverty, and I was part of it, and left this place in a little bit better place than we found it. And that alone should give us enough energy. Thank you very much.